Have you ever considered that in every collapse, there's an opportunity to regenerate and reorder a new paradigm? In this mini series, Collapsing into Wholeness, we're uncovering the gems within the pattern of destruction as transformation. I'm Victoria McMahon, and when women work with me, they are held and guided, being led into life's deeper intelligence.
And I'm Danielle YS. I guide high achieving women through life and career transitions so they can befriend the unknown and step into their next chapter with clarity, courage, and curiosity. Welcome back to our mini series on collapsing into wholeness. This is part 3. We have already gone into collapsing as a form of transforming. And today we're diving into the nuances of that to explore how collapsing is generating our next chapter. So, in our previous conversations, we talked about the Great Oxidation Event and are using that as a metaphor to move us through this collapsing into wholeness mini series. We've seen how about 2.5 billion years ago, oxygen was toxic to all life on Earth. And as those algae were creating more oxygen and photosynthesizing, it started to seep into our oceans, killing the majority of biology on our planet. Biology started to use oxygen to create energy, and it became 16 times more efficient than metabolism without oxygen. And it enabled life to start coming onto land. Before the Great Oxidation Event, life existed in our waters because that was safe. There wasn't as much solar radiation in our waters. So, with oxygen in the atmosphere and also as something that biology could breathe and use to create energy, we were then able to come onto land. And that created all of the diverse flora, fauna, biology that we see today. This is the next layer of our conversation where collapse is an invitation into transforming into something new. That something new in that process of generation is what we're diving into today. So I want to pass it over to you, Victoria.
Thank you, Danielle. It's so good to be together again. What I'm threading is how history shows us the nuances of how life has occurred and how, at a moment's notice, it will shift, which can be collapsed then in order to bring the next nuance forward. And how many books and lectures over the years of my life that I've heard about life evolved out of the water onto land. And I've had dreams about this. And yet, the simple understanding that it was related to oxygen appearing in the environment that collapsed and then generated life in a whole new way. I so love the simplicity of how science and history are telling that story in its way, and then how other stories get told that may be similar, but maybe more colorful or mythical. So I'm really appreciating the nuances of how collapse brings us into what's next. And so many times in other conversations, we've talked about this from our own human nature point of view, that experiences that we have in our physical, emotional, mental life feel like collapse, deep collapse. And yet, in time and over that churning creative process that we're in as humans, the same thing is essentially occurring in us. We generate a new chapter, a new way of thinking about ourselves, a new way of living in our lives. I'm loving having both versions of the story. And we are here mostly to talk about us as humans in these times. But what a foundation you brought in. So that's why I love you, my science mind.
I love the way that you're talking about it and having the Great Oxidation Event as that foundation, as well as saying, let's shift the focus and bring in the human aspect. How do you see us moving forward in this conversation and hopefully beyond in enabling us to have the perspective of the Great Oxidation Event and the simplicity of it, as well as being in the experience of things shifting, collapse around us as inhabitants of this planet, all moving together. How do you see those as coming together?
So we had a conversation about how times have changed in our culture from when I was a little kid and my parents and in-laws, how their lives were different when they were little kids. And so this historical perspective of coming from the water to the land is moving through the generations. It all started with the baggie story. My mother-in-law said the first time I ever threw a baggie out in front of her, she was like, "What are you doing? You wash that, you reuse it." And that was such a gift of moving from this notion of collapse. Oh my gosh, you're telling me what I need to do, into creative generating of be in relationship to all people and all things, all that is a part of your environment. And there's so many different ways I see the history of our culture from the Depression era that she grew up in and through to now. You enlightened me about fast fashion. And then we started expanding it from fast fashion to fast food, fast times, fast cars. Those have been around, but this fast fashion concept, maybe tell that little story.
I think fast and convenience have become hand in hand with each other. We've created things that go faster as a convenience, and that has also contributed to the massive amounts of waste generation all over the world. Fast fashion is this idea of buying really cheap clothing that was made in sweatshops and for very little money. And so it's not necessarily the highest quality of craftsmanship. So it falls apart quickly, gets holes, there's threads that are missing. And because it was so cheap to buy, people then just throw it out after 1, 2, 3 uses rather than trying to fix it. The root of fast fashion really is the single use culture that we have created that started out as a convenience. And luckily, the kids these days know about fast fashion and have chosen slow fashion, clothing that is made more sustainably in better conditions and will last longer, and the choice to keep that clothing for longer. It's this interesting interplay of convenience, cheapness, fast, as well as variety. That variety is also a big part of our culture today, where our attention spans are teeny, teeny, tiny for so many reasons. There's so much data flowing at us, there's so much information, there's so many ads pulling our attention in a billion different directions that when we see a shirt that's kind of like a shirt that we have, but it's a different color or it has a slightly different design on it, we're like, "Oh, I want that." And then we follow that adrenaline bump, that serotonin boost towards that, even if it's not actually what we need or what we want. I'm curious to hear what's coming up for you with respect to choice and how we generate our next chapter from where we're at right now with fast and convenience and variety.
I love learning new things. And then a part of me feels the sadness of what fast creates. What I feel is being created is this fast culture is perpetuating our physical nervous systems into such a higher speed of operating. We feel it in the culture and the technology movement of everything happening so quickly now. The word bombardment comes into mind that you're speaking to. It feels like we're at a tipping point that if we don't get honest with ourselves, take the pause that is available, we bypass ourselves. And so then we are not able to be fully present to create the next chapter. We talked about AI and technology being the potential for good and the potential for toxicity. It's this feeling of we are the ones that are going to choose what that paradigm shift will, in fact, generate individually and collectively, because there may be some of us that are more individually present to it, but there's got to be enough of us to tip humanity into the paradigm shift that brings equilibrium, that brings peace, that brings you name it. I'd love to hand it off to you, this notion of not only the care for our nervous system and that of humanities, but also the sense of how we get stuck and how we could use the energy of that collapse to propel us into the next chapter. Does that geek your science mind at all?
It does geek my science mind. I love that phrase. I had this image of this big, deep chasm, San Andreas Fault, gigantic, and then the collapse in, and that being an experience in our nervous system that we can say, oh shit, get paralyzed and not do anything, and then just fall to the bottom and stay stuck at that bottom. Or have that collapse and then keep going and use that momentum to continue on through into the next thing. If you're talking about orbital mechanics, it's this idea of the slingshot where getting a satellite or a spacecraft from one point to another point that's really far away. Sometimes the best way to get there is not a straight line, or it's not even a direct line. Sometimes it looks like a slingshot, where if you have Earth here and you have another body here, maybe you send something out from Earth and it goes close enough to that orbital body to be pulled into its gravitational pull and then slingshot out towards something else in the direction that you actually want to. You needed that extra momentum to get you going. So either they get stuck in orbit around that gravitational body if they don't have enough speed, or they slingshot out, which actually the metaphor is getting better as we go because we need enough speed and enough collapse to be able to then slingshot out and continue momentum rather than just getting stuck in orbit. It's just like the star collapsing that we talked about earlier, where we need enough mass and enough collapse to be able to ignite it into a star. Because if there's not enough mass, it will collapse, but then it won't ignite. Or maybe it'll just smolder, but it won't become a bright star. It'll become a brown dwarf.
Some of us can feel either days or months or years like being a brown dwarf. We're just stuck in that patterning. We need enough stress on our system to slingshot us into what's next. So it's not the stress that's the problem. It's not the stress itself. It's your response to and reaction, that creative conscious presence gives us the momentum for the slingshot into what's next. So now I'm really curious about slingshotting and how do we consciously choose what we want to slingshot into?
I don't know if in this moment I have the answer. And I guess I shouldn't have the answer because this is a collective thing that we are moving towards. I think it's less about figuring out the exact destination and more about figuring out the way that we want to move towards whatever the destination is. And you and I have talked about this being present with the experience in our physical bodies, being with what's here, being with what exists, the what is, and having gratitude for what's there, not in a sense of bypassing, like saying all is well, all is fine because I'm grateful for what I have, but really being grateful for what's physically here and knowing that what is here is what we need in this moment, even if it is stressful, even if it is collapse. Within this conversation of fast fashion, we were talking about the idea that if we buy something new, some folks like to do this practice, and I have done this before as well, of, okay, I bought a new shirt. That means that I'm going to get rid of a shirt that I have already. But that doesn't actually get to the root of fast fashion or materialism or consumerism. It's less about swapping one for another because that's just dealing with the weeds but not the roots. Getting to the root of it is having gratitude for what we have. And I have this Yogi Tea Bag tag that I like to pull up that says, gratitude is not about what is received. It's about how you receive what is there. It's not about the clothing. It's not about the plastic bag. It's not about the destination. It's about how we receive each of those things.
Are we in relationship with a piece of clothing, a baggie? Are we present to how those things in our life are part of who we are, how they support and fulfill us or not. I was thinking about the closet and saying, one of my practices is to go into my closet and take out 10 things, and that's it. Just let them go. The reason I say that is there is this response to the fastness. And sometimes that response is get off the hamster wheel for a moment so that you can be with what is long enough to see what is my relationship to. I think what we're ultimately saying is it's not about how many things you have, it's about how you're in relationship in yourself and with what you're surrounded by. And ultimately, being in relationship to, which generates gratitude, is a deep register for the new paradigm shift, for the next chapter to be in balance with technology, with whatever newly generates in our culture, that we use our capacity to pause so we can build relationships with things, with ourselves, with each other, that actually bring us more into the wholeness. And the collapses are that necessary part that propels the slingshot to occur. I think we've got to be honest that we need to take some time to say, yes, this is what I want the next chapter to look like, not only in my own life, but in the life of the planet, in the relationships. And it's on us right now. What better time when the energy is so full from the collapse that it's being generated? This is our time to get clear so that when the slingshot happens, we are propelled where we want to go rather than just being taken along for a ride.
The imagery that comes to me is this idea of activation energy. It's a scientific term for exciting atoms, and it has come into lay people's parlance, where it's like, I don't have the activation energy to get up off the couch and go to the gym. In order for something to move and get activated, you have to get over this hump of energy that if you don't have enough energy to get over, you're just going to stay in this little dip right here. You're going to stay on the couch, you're going to stay at home. But once you have that energy, you can then rise up and get into that activated state and on to the next one. So the collapse is providing that activation energy where humanity has just been stuck for a long time. And we've seen bits and pieces of us trying to activate and slowly moving up there. And maybe you activate a little bit and then fall back down, activate a little bit more, fall back down. And now these collapses we're seeing around us are giving us enough activation energy finally to build up and get over that hump into our next chapter. It really is an invitation. It really is generating something new because we're ready, because we're finally at the point where we've tried it so many times and we've had so many events happening that we finally have enough mass, we have enough activation energy, we have enough momentum to get over that hump and into this next phase. We can either just be taken along for the ride, or we can consciously see where we're at now and pause and ask ourselves, how do I actually want to be living moving forward? How do I actually want to be contributing to this world moving forward? Instead of just reacting to those grabs that grab our attention, grab our energy, grab our nervous systems.
I love how you said getting over the hump. And then you went back and said, we can be taken for the ride. There are those of us that are lulling at the bottom. And then I thought of the overactive nervous system of being taken for the ride, that we're already up over, super activated, but we didn't consciously choose that route. Those of us that are in the fast activation field have to pause and come back to ourselves so we can choose and generate the forward movement. And those of us that are hanging out at the bottom. So we're in one version or the other in our tendencies. If we see clearly, if we're in the overactivated aspect, we've got to pause and come back to centered, like we've talked about in other podcasts. And then you're bringing in the underactivated, not enough momentum. And we really need to be present and stay with and in our choice as well to keep moving forward instead of freezing. It's the fight, flight, freeze being in a different storyline. So I'm really appreciating how we're developing the awareness from the oxidation of our history. And now its activation is another aspect that supports us to be in the momentum of the next chapter, to be fully present, to be with what is in the response of gratitude, and to be steady. And we will get there by staying present in our choice.
And that last part, staying present in our choice, it's so full of potential because there is the prerequisite in there that if we are staying present with our choice, we have made our choice. We have taken that pause, chosen what we actually want to show up as and how we want to show up. And then we're choosing to stay present with it and move forward with it, even through the craziness of the slingshot or of the activation energy or oxidation event, whatever it might be. We're staying present with it. We're choosing it and we're staying present with it and we're committing to it.
What you're pointing to is the next conversation of how we create that order, that movement, how everything lines up for us and that relationship is developing. So enough for now.
Exactly. Enough for now. This is the cliffhanger. Catch us next week for part 4 of our mini series. Any final words just to wrap us up for part 3 or invitations?
The invitation is to respond and share. Are you in the dip area? Are you riding the fast lane unconsciously? How does that happen for you? And then tease us into the next conversation of what are you choosing and ordering forward in your life in how you want to see humanity go. Share with us.
Can't wait to hear it. And we are so excited to talk with you next time. Thank you for diving deep into YSM conversations with us. If this stirred something in you, subscribe to keep discovering with us. And if someone came to mind while listening, share this episode with them. We are meant to move through life together.
We are Danielle YS and Victoria McMahon, sharing story with you on behalf of seeding our next collective chapter.